Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to the Board of Trustees meeting for the Utah Transit Authority on today, Wednesday, April the 15th. We are doing this electronically via a live stream, and welcome those who are able to join us or to watch us later. The presenters likewise today will be presenting through WebEx over our YouTube live stream. We would just note that public comment was received through means prior to this meeting, and those have been made available to the Board of Trustees and will certainly be part of the public record. And we encourage even follow-up public comment to the board through our website at rideuta.com. We'd like to begin with our public safety minute, and would turn that time over to Sheldon Shaw. Good morning, Sheldon.
Good morning, Chair, Trustees. As always, appreciate the opportunity to provide a safety minute. Today I want to talk about the use of face coverings. Things have changed a lot in our response to COVID-19. It started where those who were infected or those who were in the medical community were the ones who were asked to wear face coverings. That has now changed, and we're all asked to wear cloth face coverings in order to help with social distancing. And so if you're going to be in a place where there's significant community-based transmission, you're in a grocery store, you're in a pharmacy, we should all be trying to wear cloth face coverings in order to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. And our governor and the task force has also asked us as Utahns to, where we can, wear face coverings in order to help the public feel safe as we're out and about. So I just wanted to pass that along. Thanks for the opportunity, Chair.
Great, thank you, Sheldon. That's great advice to us all. Our next item up is our consent agenda, which includes approval of the prior board minutes. I'll entertain a motion on that.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the minutes of the April 8th board meeting.
Second.
I have a motion from Kent, seconded by Beth. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you. We'll next have our agency report. We'll turn that over to our Executive Director, Carolyn Gunott. And welcome and good morning, Carolyn. I think your volume's off.
I got to get used to that. I'm sorry about that. Just wanted to cover a couple things today on the front runner and on the ridership on front runner, bus, light rail, and paratransit. Currently, our fixed route bus service is down 73% on our normal ridership. Our normal ridership is over 80,000 a day for buses. And on Monday, we saw 22,271 riders. For front runner, we're down about 89%, mostly due to the commuter market. Normal ridership is about 18,800. We're down to about 2,027 is what we saw on Monday. On light rail, we're down 74%. Where our normal ridership is over 54,000 a day. Friday's ridership was 14,171, and our paratransit is down substantially, down 88%. We carry about 1,600 passengers a day, and we're down to about 200 a day currently. So we have seen substantial ridership drops. We'll be able to give you more detail over the next coming weeks, and actually I'll give you a little bit more on Saturday that I can send out or we can post as well on our Saturday and Sunday ridership. So that's on the ridership report. On the COVID-19 update, just want to give you a couple things to talk about. We really want to thank all of our operators for moving into this new schedule quickly. And they really are dedicated, as well as our entire team, in trying to move forward in the service modifications. And so just want to reiterate again, our top priority is to continue provide service in the safest way, both to our customers and to our operators and our workforce. Just a couple things are going on since we started the service modifications and implementing the schedule. We have been closely monitoring the ridership and feedback from our customers. And after receiving some data and feedback, we have found that several routes have been experiencing heavy loads during peak hours. Primarily, we're not able to maintain sort of social distancing standards that we would like to see. So we have increased frequency on the following routes to mitigate the crowded buses and to ensure that we can have that social distancing for our riders. Route 33, we implemented 15-minute service between West Valley Central Station and Mill Creek Station from 5:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. Route 35, we have 2 eastbound trips that were added at 4:53 a.m. and 5:23 a.m. And these trips will continue as Route 33 to the Mill Creek Station. Route 200, we implemented 15-minute service, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. The additional trips will not serve the state capitol, but the trips that currently serve the capitol will continue to do so. So the newer trips, the new 15-minute service, everyone will not serve the state capitol. And then Route 217, we implemented 15 service between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Just a couple other things on Front Runner and Tracks. We have cordoned off the areas immediately behind the operator cabins to promote social distancing between the operators and the riders. ADA customers who need to use the ramp to board or alight are still being able to be accommodated on the older series Trax cars. Stopping the spread on tracks is a focus of ours to keep everyone safe while riding tracks. Operators are now opening the doors after arriving the stations, so riders do not need to press the button to open the doors. ADA customers who need to use the ramp will still need to deploy the button to deploy the ramp. And just as once again, we're continuing to tell our customers to do our part to stop the spread, which is primarily follow the governor's directive. Stay home, stay safe, stay home. Don't ride transit if you're ill. Follow social distancing practice when you're on transit. And any other information, once again, we can find on, we continue to update our website, rideuta.com/health. So those are any questions or any of the comments I have today to give you an update. Also, Eddie Cummins is also online here to answer any questions that you and the board have.
I did have one question, Carolyn, and first of all, thank you to you and your staff for being responsive and being mindful and looking for ways to mitigate as much as you can. Do you see travel patterns itself changing from like our historic sort of peak time travel times? It seems like everybody's keeping sort of odd schedules. I'm wondering what you're seeing in some of those travel patterns.
Yeah, I'm going to have Eddie speak to that. And Eddie, you can turn on your camera if you want.
So I believe I'm on. Yeah, it has been interesting to see the travel patterns change. Obviously, the service that we've added back in on bus has been over on 3300 South, State Street, and Redwood Road, which are already our heavily traveled corridors. But it has been interesting, to answer your question, to see that, traditionally we always had, heavy ridership between like 6 and 8 in the morning, and then 3 to 5 in the afternoon in that area. But we've started to see significant kind of midday ridership, like around 1 to 3 o'clock type thing. And so it's been interesting. I don't know if that's due to shift changes and maybe people coming in earlier, getting off earlier, whatever is happening there. But we had some issues. I don't know, I guess it was probably a week ago, we received a phone call from the University of Utah stating that they were having heavy loads on our track system around 12:30, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And so we took a look at that. It was kind of surprising for us to see that level of ridership. So we added an additional car. So now we're running 4-car trains on tracks during that time.
Thank you.
We did see about 14,000, almost 15,000 people ride the bus system on Saturday. So we still saw decent ridership on Saturday on the bus system. I don't know how that compares to normal ridership. I don't have that number here, but just to let you know that that's what we were seeing.
I'm sorry, I had a question. What has been, have we had any responses yet from public writing or any issues with these time changes that we did? Have we had any feedback of any kind yet?
You know, we've received quite a bit of feedback with people sending things in and just, you know, thanking us for continuing to run because, you know, we are providing those essential trips to get people to where they need to go. And so we have received some feedback on, things, but most of that has been on the areas where we've had, you know, overcrowding and people felt that they weren't able to properly socially distance. And so that's what's led us to add in the additional frequency on the routes that Carolyn mentioned.
Mr. Chair, I had a follow-up question on that. Is there, because as you just mentioned, you discovered that there's an unexpected ridership increases during the middle of the day. Are we going to be able to, I guess, communicate that part of it to riders that we are being adaptive in our servicing or our operations during this time, and to give us communication in regards to the potential for not having too many people on there, so thus not enough social distancing? Is there going to be some way for people to do that? Or are we just kind of keeping an eye out on what we're looking at right now?
So we have communicated some of that out to through our communication channels and updated the schedules. Really, we're just monitoring it. We're monitoring to make sure, obviously, we're hearing from customers, but we're also talking to our operators and seeing what they're seeing out there on a day-to-day basis and just making adjustments as needed. You know, the thing that I've said over the past month, probably every time I've talked, that it's very important that we remain flexible, that we listen to what's going on, we listen to our customers, we listen to our operators, and then we react quickly. And that's what we've been able to do up to this point. We'll continue to monitor. I think that we will continue to see things that will need to change as our ridership starts to come back and things start to change. I think we'll be making additional adjustments as we go on.
Other questions from the board on this item? And then I think, Carolyn, you probably have some more information to share with us.
No, I think that's it. I think those were the two items. I'm at this point. That concludes my report. Or was there something else?
No, that's. I just wanted to make sure. So
no, that was it. Thank you.
Thanks for that report. With that, that takes us to our next item, which is a resolution. And the first one is an amended resolution setting compensation for district officers and administrative employees and appointing officers. And I don't know, Kim Ulibarri, are you presenting at all on this or just here to answer questions?
I'm here to just answer questions, or I can present if you need any more information.
Maybe just a quick background of why we're amending.
Sure. After the resolution was adopted in February, we had a new compensation analyst hired who found an error in our salary structure that we had presented. The error was on the maximum side of the pay grades, and it was just a formula error that was applied when the consultant put it together for us. We caught it fairly quickly. It didn't impact anybody's pay or budget. And so the new resolution that you see in front of you has the corrected salary structure attached that reflects the intended 2% increase to that structure and fixes the maximums. They were actually calculated higher, so this is we're lowering those maximums, and it didn't impact any person or any budget or any salary.
Right. On good catch by the new hires. So
yes.
Any questions from members of the board? If there are none, I would entertain a motion on this item.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve R 2020-02-02, the resolution setting compensation for district officers and administrative people and appointing officers. Administrative employees.
I have a motion from Beth, seconded by Kent. I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Trustee Millington,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
The vote is unanimous. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kim. Next item up is a resolution approving the execution of an interlocal cooperation agreement with Midvale City for provisions of additional funds to supplement an existing Tiger stakeholder agreement. And I have Mary Delaretto and Heather Benning that are here to present. We'll go to Mary first.
Good morning. So this resolution is for the Midvale City Tiger Project, which is a crosswalk adjacent to one of our tracks lines. The project came in higher than originally anticipated because we had to tie into our track signal system. The original agreement stated that Midvale City would pay for any overages, and this supplement just explains how we would invoice them. They're getting those additional funds from Salt Lake County. So UTA will not have to pay anything. This is just describing how that payment option will work and committing those additional funds.
Questions from the board?
Mary, just a question. What's the amount of the overrun here?
I believe it's $375,000. And that's all because of the signal work that hadn't been anticipated.
Okay.
So Mary, that's what in essence happened is because of that desire to tie into our system, that's what created the increase. And then that structure just goes no further up than 375,000. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, we had to tie in because we were so close to our line and we didn't want a traffic signal stopping and having people stuck on the tracks. So we had to work with the signal system folks and get that all working properly. But no, that is the maximum. The project is already completed, so it won't go up more than that.
Thank you.
Great.
And I don't know if Heather had anything to add.
This is Heather Benning. So it's, you're correct, it's up to $375,000 because that's the amount that the county is willing to contribute. But we actually know that we are not going to utilize that full $375,000. So we're just waiting on final invoices and then we'll invoice the city for the overage. It's probably more like a third of that, $375,000.
Heather, I'm sorry. Could you say that amount again? Your microphone kind of faded out for me. It's about 100,000 over. Is that what you said?
Yeah, right now it looks like it's about 100 to between 100 and 200. We're still waiting on final invoicing, but it's definitely not going to be the full 375.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion on this resolution.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the R 2020-04-04, the resolution approving the execution of an interlocal cooperation agreement with Midvale City for the provision of additional funds to supplement the existing Tiger stakeholder agreement.
Second.
I have a motion by Kent, seconded by Beth. I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Trustee Millington,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
The vote is unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item up is a resolution approving an interlocal cooperation agreement with Provo City for the, for the Provo Pedestrian Overpass Bridge, also a Tiger project. And we'll back to both Mary and Heather on this one as well.
Okay, yeah, this is similar. This is to do the amendment for the Provo Pedestrian Overpass Bridge Tiger project. And it just commits it commits all the stakeholder payments to get that project completed. We anticipate that project may increase. This is just to do the design portion. So we anticipate that cost may go up, and then we would have to identify additional funding sources. We have applied for TTIF funds and some other local funds. Heather could fill you in on that a little bit more, but this is just to get the agreement done so we could start the design and get a final pricing on that project. And Heather, why don't you add a little bit more on that?
Yeah, good morning. So for Provo City, this project has not started yet. So this is the stakeholder agreement and the supplement, which establishes the project scope and budget. So right now the budget is set at about $4.4 million, and that's made up of Tiger Grant funds, UDOT funds, and funds from MAG. We have reviewed the original concept estimate and identified that we're likely going to need additional funds. So Provo City has applied for the TTIF first last mile funds through UDOT, and then as well as a CDBG grant. So if those funds come in, then we will have to do a supplement later to add those in, similar to what we just discussed for Midvale. But this stakeholder agreement will allow us to get started on design. And then with the CMGC contract we have with Granite, we'll be able to price at the design milestones to see where we're at with the budget.
Heather, question for you. If if the other two options that Provo is exploring for gap funding on the project don't materialize, is there a point where you pull the plug on it, or do they just keep working on it? I mean, what's their mindset? Just what they want to do regardless.
Yeah, so the project, most of the funding is coming from UDOT and MAG as far as the matching funds. This stakeholder agreement is between UTA and the city, and it makes the city responsible for any costs that go over the original budget, but it also allows them to back out if needed. So if we get to 30% design and we find that we're significantly over budget and they don't have the additional funds and they didn't obtain the funds that they were seeking, then they can decide to pull out, but then they will owe back any costs incurred on the project to date.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions from the board?
I did have a question. So they're in the process of applying for any other potential sources for revenue. So in essence, there's not really a timeline on this. Is that correct?
There is a timeline on the project as far as the Tiger Grant funds. So currently for the Tiger Grant, the period of performance end date, so the last date any costs can be incurred on any of the Tiger projects, is October 2022. So right now, getting the stakeholder agreement executed, we will be on schedule for that. If it's delayed too much, then we would have to request to extend the grant.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Don't see any. With that, I would turn to maybe Trustee Millington for a motion on this one.
I move that we approve this R 2020-04-05, the resolution approving an interlocal cooperation agreement with Provo City for the Provo Pedestrian Overpass Bridge as a part of this Tiger project.
Second.
I have a motion from Kent, seconded by Beth. I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Trustee Millington,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
The vote is unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll next move to item D, which is a resolution authorizing the purchase of real property from Boyer Lake Point LLC, and there's a number of parcels listed on the agenda. And we'll turn to our Director of Real Estate, Paul Drake. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair and trustees. So we're getting closer to finishing our right-of-way acquisitions for the Provo Orem BRT. The acquisition being presented today was impacted on all 4 sides, and it's located at 360 West University Parkway in Orem. The impacted property includes several big box stores and restaurant pads on the north side of University. For the project, we needed to purchase nearly 41,000 square feet of fee property and nearly 400 square feet of perpetual easement and about 1.5 acres or 65,000 square feet of temporary construction easements. So the total cost of the property will be a little over $1.4 million, including an administrative settlement of just over $325,000, which includes costs for landscaping, signage, parking, and a mediated adjustment for differing appraisal values. Nearly $17,000 of that has already been paid to a signed contractor. If I could go to the next slide, Jana, thanks. So here's a context map to help you better understand the affected property. As you can see, it's located between University Parkway and 1200 South in Orem and between 200 and 400 West. This is where the UVX jogs from University Parkway up to 1200 South to serve the UVU campus. Next slide, please. This is the southeast corner of the affected property. This exhibit shows the portion of the acquisition which goes along University Parkway. The red that you're seeing is what we're buying in fee, and the green is our temporary construction easement. Next slide. This is where it continues up 400 West onto 1200 South. This area needed to be widened to accommodate an exclusive bus lane turning left onto 200 South. Next slide, please, Jenna. So anyway, staff believes that this is a fair compensation. The FTA has concurred with the administrative settlement, and it's contemplated in the project budget. So we recommend that the board approve the purchase of the property and authorize the executive director to execute the associated documents. Do you have any questions for me?
I'll look to the board for any questions.
Paul, I do have a question. That 1.4 million purchase price, does that include the administrative settlement, or is it the additive? Is it 1.7 total? Or does
No, it does include it.
300?
It does include it, trustee. It's
So the total is the 1.4 million.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, did you have a question?
Just wanted to clarify, you said that the FTA did approve, that they concurred with your assessment. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
And Paul, I have the most relevant question, and that is, can you play the guitar in your background?
During the board meeting?
No, just in general. You have talent, or is that just for show?
We need interlude music.
I play on occasion, yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Looks nice, by the way.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions from the board, I would entertain a motion on this resolution.
I move that we approve this resolution 2020-04-06, authorizing the purchase of the real property as has been outlined on University Parkway and 400 West in Orem.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Trustee Millington,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
The vote is unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Next item up is a resolution authorizing the obligation and drawdown of Corona's Aid Relief and Economic Security Act grant monies by the executive director. And we'll turn to Carolyn and also Mary, and probably some others that Carolyn wants to involve.
Okay, so I'll start this off with a couple, just to give you a little bit of update on the, as you called it, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or what we know as CARES Act, that was approved by Congress. It did provide for $25 billion to transit agencies for the operators during relief during this time and to fund our activities. UTA, it's based on apportionment of federal formula funds using their normal formula, how they apportion that to the various areas. We will receive, we're apportioned $187 million to UTA. All the eligible, what we call 5307 activities, they continue to be eligible for CARES Act funding, including planning, capital, and operations. Capital expenses can include preventive maintenance, which is primarily what we do use our formula funds on, vehicle replacement, equipment purchasing, and facility repair. Operating expenses can include driver salaries, supplies, personal protective equipment, or PPE, fuel, and other expenses related to keeping the system operating and maintained on a day-to-day basis. In addition, the funds may be used to pay for administrative leave of operations personnel due to reductions in service or quarantine, which is primarily based, continue to pay the wages and labor. The CARE funds are 100% federal with no match required, which is what's a little bit different than the normal 5307 program for us. The funds have no end date. Compliance with federal requirements is mandatory, although requests for waivers are permitted. CARES Act funds must be a separate grant from the non-CARES Act funding, but amendments are allowed to the CARES Act if all funds are not initially obligated. And so that does mean that's the reason why today you're doing a resolution specifically taking the drawdown of the CARES grant money, even though we've already done a resolution for us to be able to draw down the normal formula funds that we get. There still continues to need some clarification from FTA. There's a lot of questions going around the industry. I had seen a couple from some of my fellow peers asking for some clarification about what can it be used for funding, still specific details on the operations side. So those are still being clarified. But we are moving forward with proposing to apply the CARES funding to operating department wages and benefits and operations training department wages and benefits, propulsion power costs, compressed natural gas costs. We'll request an exemption for CARES fund to pay for diesel and unleaded fuel, which are not procured following federal requirements. And then we're looking at a couple capital improvements, and Mary or Patty could go into that a little bit more. Just to know, there's also, FTA has an Emergencies Relief Funding Act. FTA expanded eligibility and increased federal shares for the 5307 urbanized area formula programs, meaning that they can be used for expenses related directly to the emergency. You can use them if they're previously portioned for capital and operating expenses directly related to COVID-19 response, with an increased federal share up to 80%. And I think the federal share before was previously slightly lower. There is in addition to the CARES fund, this is in addition to the CARES funds that we have. But currently we have already anticipated and we'll use 5307 and what we also call 5337 formula funds for preventive maintenance and paratransit operations. In addition, there's also FEMA funding, and there's no limit on funds for an agency that can request FEMA as long as they are eligible. It looks as if we are eligible due to the state declaring an emergency and that being also agreed upon at the federal levels. We can apply possibly up to $3 million for bus operator barriers on buses, which is what we're looking at, some of the COVID-19 response expenses. So that's just sort of some of the information so far regarding CARES. I'm going to turn it to Mary to talk specifically about the resolution and any more detail about what we're planning on spending it on. Mary?
Thank you, Carolyn. So the resolution authorizes the executive director to execute the grant as we put in requests to draw down funds. The initial request that we're going to be submitting will be primarily, I believe, for operating funds. And then as we determine if there's capital projects, we can amend that grant to add those items as well. as soon as we get the grant entered into the system, it will have to go through the FTA normal process, which could take about 30 days. And then we can start drawing down those funds as soon as Carolyn executes that grant. So this gives the authority for her to execute those grants as soon as they're available. Any specific questions on that?
Yeah, I have a question. Now, Carolyn, you delineated not only the CARES grant, but you talked about FEMA and some other grants. This particular resolution is only for the CARES funding. Do I understand that correctly?
That is correct. We don't have the details on the FEMA limits yet, and there is a training, I believe it is today, we'll get more of those details. So we'll probably come back to you with a similar resolution for the FEMA drawdowns.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay.
One question I have, and I know that I've seen emails and other things that have indicated that we've been tracking COVID related expenses as we sort of determine what's the best cost to apply toward these particular grant funds. Is that an easy number to come up with, or will we have to go back and do a lot of
We're looking at that right now, Carlton. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. We're
No,
looking
you're
at
good.
that to see where we could maximize our awards. You know, what makes sense to put under FEMA, what makes sense to put under CARES. And so we are looking at that right now.
Okay.
Bob might have more info on that, but that's where we are right now.
We are looking primarily heavily at putting it towards our operators' wages and benefits. We are going to see a decrease in some of our revenues. We have seen it in fares. We do expect it substantially on the sales tax revenues. We're about 2/3 funded for operations out of sales tax. So we do want to be able to take a look at that as well. Bob can talk a little bit. We're doing a little bit more analysis about where we will be in terms of funding. And we don't really have good numbers yet on sales tax. There's ranges of how much sales tax will go down. But once we get that, we're going to be taking a look at it. But we are seeing a need to draw down for operating expenses at least the first 2 years, if not up to through a third year. So Bob, do you have anything, just brief comments on this?
Sure. So I think the thing to keep in mind is the CARES Act also talks about revenue loss, but there's not a mechanism to draw down the allocation based upon revenue loss. It's based upon operating expense or other expenses. So as we draw down on operating expenses, it's really not to substitute for those expenses. It's really to substitute for the revenue loss. And I'm thinking through what that model may look like, but Carolyn's correct. I think we need to think about this funding as how do we use these funds over the next few years to, at the end, come out where our new revenue stream will be. In the last Great Recession, we came out with less revenue overall than when we started. There was a reset, if you remember. Revenues were at one point, they went down, and then they never made it back to that same growth level, or at least the same dollar amount. So it's hard to know how this one's going to come out, but I think we need to be prepared to think of it that way, that we may not have the same revenue sources or amount of revenues that we had before.
Thank you.
And just one last thing, and we talked mostly on the operating. That is the majority of the funds we expect on spending on operations. There are a couple of things that we're looking at in terms of providing capital improvements to front runner, to tracks, and even to the bus. I did mention this, maybe potentially bus operator barriers to place on buses that sort of shield the bus operators. That's ongoing. I think we're looking at potential replacement of seats on tracks away from the fabric, which we had been planning on and looking at that, but we might be pushing that a little faster now so that it's easier for maintenance and cleanliness going forward. Even though we are pretty diligent about cleaning the fabric seats, it is a contracted service, a cost to us. And if we could do it in a more efficient way and be able to keep the seats clean and disinfected, that would be great as well. And then some of the some minor, not minor, but some capital improvements on Front Runner in terms of keeping the system running even during the winter weather. So those are activities we're looking at.
Great. Other questions from the board on this item?
I did have a question. Bob, you said something to the effect that this money, that you're looking at it from a 2 to 3 year modeling structure in order to actually get us back to where we were prior to COVID-19. Is there any requirements or stipulations on the CARES funding for us to do a certain type of modeling, or is that just what we are doing?
No, it's what we're doing. And, I think what we're thinking right now is for the eligible expenses, we should draw down as those eligible expenses occur, and then we can use those grant funds as we look at our longer term financial package and how we allocate those funds internally. So I think there'll be a certain percentage that'll be needed this year. I don't know how much that is yet. Depends on, you want to take worst case, do you want to take best case, likely case, and we don't know what those are yet. But then there'll be some more that'll probably be needed for 2021. And if we can manage it well, there could be funds available for 2022 that would help the agency get into a soft landing approach.
Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. Any other questions from the board? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion on this resolution.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve R 2020-0407, the resolution authorizing the obligation and drawdown of Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act grant monies by the Executive Director.
Second.
I have a motion by Beth, seconded by Kent. I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington,
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Jensen.
Aye.
The vote is unanimous. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn, and thanks to your team. And we appreciate all the work that's been done to get us to this point. We'll next come up to our contracts, disbursements, and grants, and we have an overview of pre-procurement. We'll turn to Todd Mills for that. Morning, Todd.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, trustees. So we do have 2 procurements that are ready to go out for bid for. The first one is to put a new roof on building number 8 at the Meadowbrook campus. This is the maintenance and warehouse facility out there. The current roof's in pretty bad shape with several holes in it that need to be patched. And this project was included in the capital budget for 2020, and it will be procured as an IFB with selection based on lowest cost bid. I do have Kevin Anderson on the line as well to answer any detailed questions you might have on that one.
I did have one question, Todd, and I don't know if Kevin can answer it or not, but I know we had talked of doing some minor, maybe not minor, but some additions out at Meadowbrook to one day handle more bus service. Would any of this work on the roofs be duplicative, or is this stuff that would be separate from that new addition that had been contemplated?
Hey, Carlton, this is Kevin. Good morning.
Morning.
All the plans I've seen so far, the new addition will be separate from this roof. It'll be attached to this building, but it will need to be done separately.
Well, that's great. I just thought if there was either economies of scale or we're having to come back and rip out part of what you just put in, it would be nice to avoid it. But really...
No, we'll be fine that way, Carlton. We won't have to remove anything, or we won't go backwards in any way with what we're planning on doing here.
Oh, okay, great. Any other questions on that one? All right.
I had a question. Kevin or Todd, I'm just wanted to refresh my position here. Are we just patching the roof, or are we going to consider, what's the overall life of that roof? I just was curious as to how that's going to work.
Hi, Beth, this is Kevin. So it will be a complete tear off and replacement with a 20-year minimum guarantee on the new roof.
Thank you.
All right. You want to go to the next one, Todd?
Sure. The next procurement we have is, excuse me, out at the Jordan River Rail Facility. It's to procure a prefabricated restroom, as well as do any associated site work that's necessary to install a restroom on the west side of the Jordan River facility. If you're familiar with that facility, you know that if you're on the west yard there, it's quite a trip to go to use any restrooms. And so this would put a prefabricated restroom out there in that area. The procurement will be conducted as an IFB and awarded based on lowest cost bid as well. And I have Brandon Heath, who's the project manager on that, available to answer any detailed questions you have on that.
Any questions from the board on that one? That makes a lot of sense. Good luck with that one. I think that's it.
That's all I have.
Great. Thank you, Todd, for that update. We'll next go to grant applications and come back to Mary Delarido. Good morning.
Hello again. This grant opportunity is through Rocky Mountain Power for vehicle charging infrastructure. Rocky Mountain Power provides opportunities to qualifying recipients to receive financial support to advance the construction of new electric vehicle charging infrastructure projects. We did get a grant from them in the past for $500,000 for the charging infrastructure overhead chargers over at the central garage. And this is requesting two more projects, funding for two more projects. One is the electric vehicle charging for the Volkswagen grant award buses that we'll be receiving. And we're not sure where they'll be put yet, but it'll depend on how we're going to run those buses in our service. And the other is for overhead charger en route for the Ogden BRT project. Both of these projects already include that infrastructure. This would just be additional funds to help pay for those items. Any questions on that?
Just this one question for the Ogden BRT infrastructure. Will that be, you said that's en route. Do you know where that's going to be placed? Will it be at the end of the?
We'll have one at the train station, the Ogden station, and the other one we think will either be on campus at the D Event Center or it'll be at the hospital. I don't know that we've made final decision on that yet.
Okay. So basically it'll be up the hill towards the end of the route.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mary? Seeing none, we're scheduled actually now for a 10-minute break while we allow for some of our next presenters to come on for a discussion. So we'll invite participants to just mute their video and join again at 10 o'clock. We welcome everyone back to our meeting of the Board of Trustees for the Utah Transit Authority. And we're now to item 7 on our agenda, which is a discussion item about our 2020 benchmark survey. And I know we were ready to go a little while ago and had some unusual affairs that day and a few other things that have delayed this, but we welcome Nicole Bardot as well as her team with Andrea Packer, Chad Harris and Jen Riley of R&R Partners, Blake Moore and Alex Bean from the Cicero Group. And so we'll turn the time over to Nicole.
Thank you, Chair and trustees. I'm excited today to talk about our benchmark survey, and I know it's been in time since we've waited a little while to get here, but I'm going to do a brief introduction just to get some context of our benchmark survey. And I think about 3 weeks ago, I was, along with my colleagues, came in front of the trustees to talk about our 2020 goals and updating. One of the goals was updating our communications framework. And so for 2020, I'll be updating the communication strategy, which this benchmarks survey is the tool in which we gauge how our overall communication strategy, PR marketing, community relations, and our messaging is resonating with our actual audience. And so today, what you're going to hear is, how is our strategy working? And I am happy to tell you that what you're going to hear today is that our main focus of that strategy, people, service, stewardship, is working. And really, you know, the overall new brand campaign that we launched last year in 2019 with the new leadership, with the new strategy, and those key messages of really focusing on people, turning that dial to service, has resonated with our audience. And so as I look to, with my team, update the communications framework, start to listen to what our survey says. We may refocus it a little bit, but what you're going to hear today is that we need to stay on that same trajectory, and that what we did in 2019, really engaging the public with the people and listening to how we can, as we said, really align and engage with, you know, our community members, is where we need to continue to go. And so our dials aren't going to change much. The strategy tone isn't going to change much. We're really going to stay on that same trajectory. So I'm going to turn the time over to Andrea to really dial in on some of those key data points so that you can kind of dive in, and I won't steal her thunder, but I just wanted to bring it back to kind of the higher level of where this kind of starts, and why this is a really good tool for us to measure where we're going and how we continue to change kind of and tweak what we do. And then at the end, if you have questions, please let me know. So Andrea, I'm going to turn the time over to you, and you can continue on that.
Great. Thank you for that introduction. And I share Nicole's enthusiasm about presenting this to the board. This is the second time the board has seen the results of this survey. I think I presented with Nicole and the team last year on it. But just by way of quick history, we've been doing this survey since I've been at UTA. So it's given us a really good tool to measure things over time, with a little bit of tweaking each year depending on what's happening in the climate and within the organization. But just to point out some highlights on this slide, it is an annual survey we've done to the general public. We do a lot of onboard surveys, we do a lot of other very targeted surveys, but this is one of the very general public high-level surveys that we do. And with this effort, it did include 2 focus groups. I don't know if you recall last year with the change in the organization and things that were happening, we did not do the focus groups. We made a commitment to bring those back this year. And so we did those in October of last fall. And those really give us kind of some high-level topic areas to focus on in the telephone survey, which was conducted in December and January of this year. We just kind of avoided the holidays. So just at a high level, as Nicole said, this really guides our messaging and our strategy and how we turn those dials, as we like to call it. And then some of the key things we use this to gauge are just overall public perception of the agency and how we are doing. Perception of our services by mode, and you'll see some more detail about that. We do ask very high-level questions about why people ride or don't ride, as well as what might be the highest reported motivators to encourage them to ride. And then lastly, which really guides our marketing and communications, is if people are hearing messages about UTA, where they are hearing them, and then as potential or current riders, where they would look for information. So that really is an overall assessment of what this survey is designed to do. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we did conduct 2 focus groups, 20 participants total. We had 10 participants in the non-rider group, which I'll explain in a little bit, because there may be some non-riders, but most people these days know someone who rides, so that has been something that has changed over time. And the second group were pretty regular, pretty frequent riders, people who are familiar with the system. And we really do try to mix it up demographically in these focus groups, which services they use, so we don't get a preponderance of bus riders versus rail riders. And we do look for a mix of payment methods. And so that's kind of a general makeup of those focus groups. The telephone survey we conducted in December and January, just over 600 surveys. Typically, you would see a survey in the 400 range. We have oversampled this survey for many years just to ensure we get the coverage that we want in all the counties that we serve. And you can see a little bit of a mix there. We try to mix up the demographics so that they accurately represent our market and the people in our 6-county service area. Any questions before we go to the next slide on that? Okay, great. We'll move forward. Thank you.
Sorry, my mute was not as fast as I had hoped. I did have a quick question, and you mentioned it. I just wondered if you could maybe just touch on it a bit more about how you do it throughout the entire service area, multiple counties. Could you explain how you decide how that works structurally?
I'll ask Blake or Alex if they could chime in here a little bit to explain the methodology a little bit more. Blake, if you would. Blake, are you still on mute?
No, sorry about that. I am not on mute anymore. Methodology with the telephone survey. Correct. Could you repeat the question just briefly? Sorry.
I just wanted to kind of get a feel for how much percentage-wise you went throughout our service area, because we have 6 counties in that, and I just wanted to understand how that looked.
Yeah, it'll typically be represented demographically, but to get specific numbers, Alex, is that something that we can look up and provide? I don't have the specific percentages about the breakdown of coverage right off the top of my head.
Yeah, so I can speak to that. We have historically surveyed Davis, Salt Lake, Utah, and Weber counties. And in terms of how we determine how many respondents we want from each county, we look to the census data to see what the population breakdown is for those counties, and then we make our sample of 600 proportional to that.
So is there any counties outside of what he listed that you're concerned about or wanted to know any more on?
No, structurally that makes sense. The other two counties are statistically smaller. I just kind of wanted to know where that data range was, but the census is very helpful, so thank you.
Okay, next slide if we're ready. So, we'll cover each of these topics in more detail, but I really wanted to emphasize that this slide highlights the real key takeaways. I mean, if there were some 4 or 5 things that we really wanted to emphasize that we saw come out of this slide, then this is then these are the strong highlights, which we'll dive into a little bit more. First, again, as we have tracked over years, despite some slight dips in past years, UTA's image remains in a positive place. Our focus with a lot of our branding and our messaging and our community relations is, in addition to our riders, we want to maintain a strong base of general public support. And so this year's survey did indicate that we continue to maintain in very positive territory that public support. The second point, we have specific questions in the survey which will highlight that do get to our accountability, our responsiveness, our stewardship, and those things that we have really looked to improve in the last couple of years. And you'll see in a few minutes that we saw some notable increases in these areas, and in some cases, the highest we have seen in several years. And so we were very excited to see that this year. The third, perceptions of our services remain strong, and they always have been strong, with maybe a dip here or there. But I wanted to point out that bus has been trending up the last 3 or 4 years. And you'll see again in a few moments that bus saw the highest perception in 4 years. And I'll talk a little bit about that later with some historical perspective on that. And then again, as we look to what would be the highest reasons that would motivate people to ride, it's service. They call it convenience a little bit in the focus groups and things, but convenience means different things to different people. But it's a combination of the frequency and the coverage, and even having the service accessible to them at all. And so, so those are really the key takeaways that we're excited to share about this year's survey. And with that, we can go to the next slide and we'll dive into the details. So first, the focus groups. So again, we have the 2 focus groups. One were either non-riders or people who hadn't ridden in some time. And then the others were a rider group. And again, these are qualitative findings. You know, we took them through a discussion, but these were very top of mind type of responses that we heard. And we would only follow up if there was something that popped that was a little bit of interest. And so next slide, please. So some of the general findings we saw overall were whether they're either in the non-rider or the rider group, there was a little bit of confusion about who really oversees UTA. Do we have a director, a board? We saw comments like that. However, it wasn't a major factor, and it really didn't seem to have any indication on whether they ride or not. But it was something that was a little bit of an unknown. Safety is something that we always test throughout the years, and we did hear comments in the focus groups that UTA is safe and complete and clean. Compared to other cities, particularly. Focus groups typically will have a few people who have traveled a lot to other major cities, so they have that basis of comparison. But generally, we heard comments that safety is not an issue, and that people feel that the system is safe. And then again, just kind of top of mind, when we kind of ask them what comes to their mind when they think of UTA. And it was really largely just centered about bus and the services we provide. And I wanted to take a second, if you see those drawings down there, maybe have Blake comment on how we kind of asked them to do those drawings and what we've seen from people this time.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to get adults in the room with crayons and markers and doing, elementary art. But the main point of this is, like, we're not leading them in any way. Just tell us your perception. And this is what they write. They write what they see. These things are visible in the community. Nobody is, they can do anything they want. If it's an organization that they don't like, an exercise like this could lead to, something that's a frustration or, I don't have any examples, but this is what they associate it with. It immediately goes to what they see in the community, and it's largely centered around the different modes of transportation that is offered. Nobody had like negative things to communicate via this type of creative activity.
Historical background on that, since we didn't do the focus groups last year, as I have seen and conducted this survey over the past 15 or so years, we've done this drawing and this exercise for many years, and as Blake said, we've really seen a transformation over the years. We really saw pictures drawn in years past of old clunky buses and mean operators and a lot of very negative things. And as I've watched this over the years, we've really turned things around. And so I commend the business units a lot, as they focused a lot on service quality and operator engagement and operator service. And we're seeing that reflected as we ask people just to draw their pictures. And the other things that these pictures kind of tell you with that change is that people are relating more to the service. It's something that they can see themselves riding or being a part of, or that's part of their community, where in the past we didn't see it. So this little drawing exercise is always, it's a little bit fun, but it's very intuitive for us. Next slide. So just a high-level summary of the non-rider group perceptions of UTA. As I mentioned, in the past, it was much easier for us to find people who are very unfamiliar with the service or who have never ridden. But as the system has grown and people have a family member or a spouse or a child or a friend who rides, we have seen that more people are familiar with the system, or as it says here, they are lapsed riders. Maybe they rode a couple of years ago, but then they changed jobs and they don't ride anymore. And so while this is a non-rider group, there tends to be, in recent years, some familiarity with the system. Secondly, the perception really trended towards the positive. There were a couple of people who did report a couple of negative comments, and these were kind of maybe about inconvenience or lack of service, or resentment over past scandals. And the last point I really wanted to focus on here is when these negative feelings were expressed and people mentioned past scandals, the details were vague. And so what we really took to that, and Blake could comment on that, is that the recollection and the perception of past issues and challenges UTA has faced are starting to fade. So Blake, do you want to add any more to that?
Yeah, and I won't add any more to the finding. Just as we went into the focus groups, we knew we wanted to find out this information, and so as it was brought up, and we pushed on that a little bit, and maybe even more than we would other items that are brought up. Oh, tell me about that more. What is what scandal? What do you mean by that? What happened? And we pushed on it, and anybody that had really said or brought it up had no details. They couldn't remember, what was, who was involved in it. No names were mentioned of anybody. They just remember there was a story about it. And we really pushed and tried to get it others would join. Oh yeah, maybe. And I think I don't remember anything about that. And so we were very confident in reporting that this concept or this scandal piece fading, like using that term. It was really easy for us to, once we saw that this year, to just say, no details, very vague recollection.
Any questions before we move on? All right, next slide, please. So as we quiz some the non-rider group about why they don't use, again, I previously mentioned inconvenience was the word that was said, but there are varying comments about this, whether there's not a service or a stop near them. Some comments about the commute time and how they compare that with driving. With respect to expanded service, frequency or longer hours were not as much mentioned in this group. They talked a little bit more about wider coverage, particularly on the west side of the valley. And lastly, one of the key takeaways from this group was that cost or the fares are not really a factor. There were comments made that fares and our tickets are reasonably priced, especially as they compare that to the cost of using their vehicle between maintenance and gas, and so that so the fares, as they know them, make up for that cost. Any questions? All right, next slide.
Hey, Andrea, I did have one question on the fares piece. Did you push at all or sort of raise the thing that if, and now is probably not the time, but if we were to raise it, would they discontinue using it?
No, we did not ask that question in this round of focus groups.
Yeah, and I'm just more curious than anything whether anything like that had been explored.
No, not at this time, but it is something we can look to explore in the future if you would like. Okay.
Hey, Andrea, can you go back to that previous slide really quick? I did have a question. Carlton's question actually made me think about this. Did they have any particular mode preferences? Because, one on the expanded service options, it said they preferred wider coverage. They weren't concerned about mode, i.e., should it be tracks or bus? It was more just expanded service. Is that correct?
I'm not remembering specifically. Blake, can you recall anything there?
Not specifically. To me, my feel on it. So this is me speaking. Would be that they largely were talking about tracks when they said it doesn't necessarily have coverage to them. And that's intuitive because buses have more coverage. And we'll also talk about, first mile, last mile, and that type of stuff too. But it feels like front runner people understand why it's linear, why it's straight along the Wasatch Front, but that tracks isn't necessarily something that they could take advantage of. And these focus group folks may have been more inclined to be riding tracks. They love the expanded coverage to the airport, things like that. And so we didn't specifically push on it, but if I were to opine, so please know that, I would say that they're largely saying, well, tracks, gets to Daybreak and I'm in West Valley. It doesn't necessarily come out far enough west for me to be able to get onto the main link. So that's my take. Andrea, I'll let you sort of supersede that with your opinions, but I just wanted to offer that because, it's all qual research. So we take insights from 20 different people. That's the way I would review that.
And again, it is qualitative data based on the 10 people that are in the room. We did get a couple of comments about more east-west service. And again, and there are more details we could provide on that. It just didn't rise to the top as far as some of the key things that came out of the focus groups. Any other questions? Okay. Next slide, please. So this is high level with the rider group. Again, another group of about 10 people. Almost all had positive impressions of UTA with a couple of neutrals. And this group, they are riders, so the system is working for them. And so they do consider it a convenient service for them, both with access, and then they don't have the need to use a car, or perhaps they've been able to have one less car in their family. Again, a little bit back to Carlton's comment, while we didn't probe about future fare changes, this is kind of a correlating comment. The fare pricing and passes are considered reasonable. So we look to correlate these types of questions between the focus groups, or corroborate is the real word I'm looking for. Although there were comments about the short trips, and if you do live closer into the city, the $5 round trip does feel excessive. So we did hear a little bit of comment about the short trips, but overall perceptions were fares are not really a factor, and they are considered reasonable. Lastly, I think with some of even going back to the 2015 line, because the airport line was mentioned, people are seeing the service additions that we are making. There were specific comments about the UVX line, and even although it was fresh, the autonomous vehicle pilot got a shout out from one or two people in these focus groups. So people are aware of our efforts to improve and expand service. Next slide. Blake just mentioned this, as far as rider use of UTA, the first and last mile connection is something that popped out in these focus groups, even with the dedicated riders. They talked about opportunities with other providers, like the bike share and the scooters and the ride share companies. And so it was a specific issue that came up with this group. And again, the second one there, the productive use of time, is something we have heard for the past several years more consistently, is that they do value the time they can spend on the train and the bus, instead of driving, where they can log on and get some work done, and it is a perceived benefit to them. Any questions?
Andrea, if I could just quickly add to that last benefit. I mean, think of Cicero, for example, of Cicero, our firm here. We're right by, we decided to choose here so we could be near Front Runner. We're so close. And as a firm policy, we're like, leave early, especially if you're on UTA, leave early. There's Wi-Fi, and that, don't ever feel bad about that. I mean, we made that actual firm policy to tell people, do not feel apprehensive about leaving early, knowing that you're going to be on for the next 50 minutes, but you're working and getting things done. It's just something that people really enjoy. So that's one more addition into the qual research on that, on how a firm can actually change policy and communicate that out.
Andrea, one thing that made me wonder about a little bit, and I'm not as avid reader as others in my family are, but and I don't know whether we probably aren't, maybe as we do community outreach, it dawned on me we should somehow develop a book club with our writers. People want to drain, and we used to do it in my past job, and I would buy copies for everybody in our department. The county library system would have a book that was part of a community discussion type of a thing, and generally it was lighthearted or good-natured. But I just think you got so many writers that are writing that somehow we ought to connect somehow with them in that regard. But just a thought down there.
Yeah, I like that idea. Yeah, people are, as we've done writer stories over the years and writer profiles, they talk about, I think one of them said that he read 50 books in a year just by commuting on Front Runner from like Salt Lake to Provo every day or something like that. So we do hear those stories.
No, I still remember the story of the engagement proposal because they met on, I think it was Front Runner. I'm pretty sure it was Front Runner. And I thought, okay, to broaden that out, get everybody, like, tell us your stories. I think that is a great additional benefit.
That was our Valentine's Day social media push, was tell us about your story of meeting on UTA. So we got some fun stories. So, all right, next slide, please. We'll go on. Just to summarize what we've already said, both groups do talk more about service as being the top ideas that would encourage more use. These numbers here reflect, the number of people that raise their hand as we ask these questions. So you can see two areas, expanded service, and then the real-time updates, which was something a little bit new as I've watched these over the years. So I find that interesting, but I think we have a lot of good things happening in that area, as we announced our partnership with the Transit app last July. So these focus groups were conducted in October. So we'll look to see if there's some movement in that as we do the focus groups again this year. We also are launching, our service alert service through Gov Delivery in a couple of months. And so GJ's group with the customer experience team has been doing a lot of work on real-time updates. And so I found it interesting that was a top line of mention. It just kind of probably reflects a little bit of the world we live in with easy access to information. But I also think we've made a lot of strides in these areas that hopefully we'll see some movement on this year. But again, just to emphasize that point, people want more service, and basically what they're telling us through these focus groups is if they had it by their home and it was frequent enough and went where they needed to go, they would use it. So gives us a lot of opportunity, but a lot of positive information as well.
Andrea, could you guys maybe give more definition as to what improved tech is actually trying to say? Is it technology on our end, for instance, more Wi-Fi all over, or is it technology and communications?
Help me, Blake or Jen, help me recall how we define that.
Go ahead, Jen. I don't want to talk over you.
Oh.
Blake, I think I could use your help explaining that one.
And so it wasn't ever specifically defined to what it is, but the ability to use an app to access your ridership, pay for services, things like that.
Yeah, sorry, if I could just jump in, I do have the discussion guide pulled up. And so we said improved technologies and tools such as trip planner, mobile-friendly website, etc.
Okay.
So if I can chime in to this point, these are things that we've consistently seen grow over the last 2 years on some of our data, the ABBG customer surveys, on this benchmark survey, and then some of our other qualitative data series. So that's where customer experiences come from. That's GJ's group. So to Andrea's point, you've seen our trip planner launch. We've just gotten rid of our trip planner on our website. You've seen a soft launch of Gov Delivery, which does information. So that information and technology piece under Communications and Marketing Office is kind of GJ's hold with Jaron Roberts' team, our innovative mobility team, and working with Andrea, we're trying to figure out how to get that to our riders and our non-riders, because we've seen this kind of move up, technology and information at your fingertips. And it's become more and more important to our customers and potential customers, I would say, because that goes beyond just riders. It's also even our fares people, people that want to buy passes. So this is a big deal for UTA, and you see it up there, real-time data, real-time information. So as you see us launching these new products, this is why. And again, these tools are why we need to know, because we're seeing that you saw us ask for employees with Cindy's team to be able to get that data real time for emergency information, route deviation, all of those things. And it's probably not a comprehensive program, but maybe I can put something together for you trustees to see all of those technology and app kind of things that we're putting together, so that you can see how we're trying to get that real-time information technology in the hands of our riders and potential customers. And Jared's kind of working on something right now, so it's holistic, so that we can show what we're trying to provide, because it's becoming more and more important as a transit agency to have that kind of strategy as a whole. So does that help, Trustee Holbrook, to kind of understand the improved technology and the real-time data? Because it feels like they're the same, but they can be explained differently as well.
No, that's very helpful, Nicole. I appreciate that, because what it's saying to me is that we have to continue to see what is going to be the latest and greatest practice in terms of communications, right? Because we know that that's how people are more and more today are navigating our system, and to encourage people who aren't maybe on our system right now to say, you know, we do have these communication tools. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, next slide, please. All right, so actually we'll just jump into so that kind of concludes the focus group summary. So we'll jump into a summary of the telephone survey, so we can proceed to the next slide, if you would. As I said on one of the opening slides, is UTA's favorability remains in positive territory. We saw a slight uptick this year. You can see the data from the last 5 years. Would like to point out as well that the unfavorable did drop from 19 to 15%, which is a little bit more notable. And then we saw a little bit of movement into the favorability territory. And so, as we like to say, again, a lot of our strategy is to maintain a strong base of public support beyond even our riders and those who use our system. And so this is telling us that we're in a positive place and can continue to build on that.
Hey, Andrea, is there I mean, as you look at other transit agencies or other public agencies, is sort of 15%, you know, regardless of what you do, you're going to have that many people that are unfavorable, or is there a ratio or a percentage that sort of you would expect to see, regardless of who's asking the question?
I haven't got data from other transit agencies with me. I do touch base with some of my colleagues, and we all do our surveys in a different way. As a general, as far as, you know, general company sentiment, I don't know if Blake wants to chime in on what kind of you typically see, or what these numbers might shed more light on.
Without a across the board methodology, I wouldn't feel comfortable necessarily comparing any. I don't have any specific examples of a like type of organization based on this, and this was solely handled. This question was solely focused on UTA. Alex, you've done several other things for, you know, healthcare agencies in Utah specifically, and I've done other consumer-based stuff, but it wasn't necessarily asked the same way. Would you add anything to that, Alex? It's okay if not.
Yeah, so I can't comment in terms of specific numbers that you would expect. All I can say is that in my work throughout the years, you do see organizations just will have a group of people who view it unfavorably, and that's almost always the case. It's incredibly rare In fact, I've never seen a company or an organization that was 100% favorable. There always is a group of people who view it unfavorably, but I cannot comment in terms of is that 15% high or low. You would have to conduct some research on other transportation agencies specifically to get a benchmark there.
The only other thing I'd add is when you look at it, if you do an NPS score, NPS scores are largely communicated out. This is not an NPS question, and so NPS can be a sort of consistent benchmark, whether you see what Delta reports and what you may want to report locally about UTA. But other than that, this doesn't surprise me to see a baseline of 15% unfavorable.
Andrea, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Andrea, this is Chad. Just one other comment from a marketing and advertising point of view. With the brands that I've worked with across my career, just to echo what's been said, unfortunately, I have yet to work with an organization that doesn't have some sort of unfavorable result. I tend to look for trends, especially when organizations have been through a journey like UTA has been through. I'm very encouraged to see the unfavorable numbers headed in a downward direction and the favorables remaining steady and starting to tick back up again, given some of the many adventures we'll say that UTA has gone through over the last few years. Based on what I've seen for other brands on favorability surveys, this is very encouraging for me from a marketing and advertising standpoint.
Thank you. That's all very helpful.
All right, next slide, please. Okay, so we do ask a question in the survey that over the past 6 months, we try to put a little bit of a timeline on it. Has your perception of UTA improved, stayed the same, or gotten worse? And again, we were encouraged to see that we're holding strong and at least stayed the same, which are people that are kind of holding steady or that we can still move. And again, in the gotten worse slide, we saw a drop from 8% to 4%. And I just wanted to comment a little bit on that. Sorry, I'm going to another document. What we do is we ask the questions as why has your opinion gotten worse? It's an open-ended question, and so people volunteer these answers, and we have seen significant drops in some of the issues we have faced in the past with regards to scandals, with regards to corrupt dealings, in regards to some of the challenges we're all aware of. And we've seen significant numbers from like 29% reporting scandals and corruption just 2 or 3 years ago, and now that's down in the single digits. And so financial management went from 21% a couple of 3 years ago, and it's now down to 4%. And then an open-ended comment about misuse of tax dollars also went from about the mid-20s to about a 4% rating in that open-ended question. And so that correlates back a little bit as we look for correlation or corroboration with what we heard in the focus groups, that memories of past issues are recognized as being in the past, and the details are starting to fade. And so we're very encouraged to see those significant shifts from, in the 20s to 30% down to the single digits. And then in many of the cases, and again, it's an open-ended question on why has your opinion stayed the same or improved. A lot of it is service related, where they see that we have expanded the service, or we've expanded hours, or we've added new lines. And so we can provide that detail. It's an open-ended question, but those are some of the trends we've seen, which corroborates with what we heard in the focus groups. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of 3 questions that kind of wrap up the part of the survey that is about perception of UTA as an organization and how we are doing. I have to admit, I was personally very encouraged by what we saw this year with the question about how UTA makes good use of public funds, going from a 4.29 to a 4.99 was very positive. But first, forgive me, it's hard to do this a little bit remotely, but we were going to have Blake kind of step in and give a little bit of information about the 1 to 7 scoring here, if you would, Blake. Apologize for not catching that.
Nope, and I'll be brief. 1, strongly disagree. On a scale to 7 to strongly agree. Ask specifically about use of public funds. How are they doing it? They're doing it responsibly. 1. This is a mean score as well. So the 4.99 is the average that you will see. That means that our people, obviously, I won't over-explain that. We all know what an average is, but there are people that are still going to put a 1 or a 2 that they strongly disagree. We could see it generally where those would be on some of the previous slides. But to see it stay similar for so many years using a similar sample size of survey, and then for it to uptick like this, I'll speak to just quickly the reliability. What I would go back to is what Alex and I would look at as we analyze this is the previous slide that had from 8% to 4% on opinions have gotten worse. That takes a lot for someone to say my opinion has gotten worse this year. And while the difference between 8 and 4% isn't huge, speaking to the previous slide, it is a 50% change. Like it's a noticeable change in that trend. So that trend would directly correlate to something like this, where you're seeing, some more positive feedback. And so the average mean, the means are trending up higher, and that's where you're going to land with all these. And then to see it be similar, and then to take a big notch up, it's positive. And doing it in subsequent years, we'll be able to say, okay, are we staying at that 5 level, or are we back to 4.5 or something? And so it would be helpful to see that once we go out. But for right now, I would agree with Andrea. This is definitely a positive indicator.
Thank you, Blake. So in addition to the use of public funds, a question we added just a few years ago was, is UTA being responsive to the community? And again, encouraging numbers here. We're over a 5 mean score for the first time. I think since asking this question, some of these questions we've asked for more years than others. So that's encouraging. And then the last one is UTA accountable to the public. And so we've gone up almost a full point in the last 2 years, from a 3.99 2 years ago to a 4.8. So we are generally close to kind of an average 5 out of 7 score for all of these kind of accountability and stewardship type of questions. And definitely the trend is in a positive direction. So as Nicole indicated in her introduction, we're confident that that the things that the agency has done and how we have adjusted our tone and our messaging is working, and this is an opportunity to stay the course and to keep on this trajectory and to continue to build on this trend. Are there any questions about this?
No, it's really encouraging, however, to see, and a real testament to a lot of employees' work over the last year or so.
I agree. I'm excited to see that. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, so the next slide, just got, again, the perception of our services, as I mentioned on that key slide, it does remain strong, with Trax and Frontrunner remaining again on a 1 to 7 scale in very positive territory. A little bit of kudos to buses, who have seen an uptick in the last couple of 3 years, which I'd like to, again, would just give a shout out to the business units who have done so much over these years and even in previous years to really address the public feedback they have seen. And so these are very positive trends. And then again, I think it reflects the strong brand that we have as we continue to invest in our brand. And even if people have had concerns in the past about the agency itself, they have positive perceptions about our services and the service that we put on the street. Next slide. So this was just, wanted to throw this in. The next two slides reflect questions we just added last year. So as we were getting into innovative technology like the autonomous vehicle shuttle, and then last fall we launched the microtransit with VIA. We asked a question last year, two questions about innovative technology. One is an awareness question and one is a support question. And so even though we launched VIA last year, we did not change how we phrased the question because I wanted to be able to consistently see the trend over time. And so the question was just generally, are you aware of UTA's efforts to explore innovative technologies such as autonomous vehicles? And I think it's a notable jump that the awareness increased from 16% in the first year of answering the question to 27%. So I think, and this was before we launched VIA, so it would have more reflected the autonomous vehicle shuttle pilot that was out through much of last year. So there's still some growth to go there in awareness, but I will be curious to ask this question again this year after we've had almost a full year of the VIA service as well as completing the autonomous vehicle pilot. If you go to the next slide, which was the support slide, a slight uptick, but remaining pretty consistent. So again, it's an opportunity for us as these technologies are new. And we're just in our first year of both the AV shuttle and the microtransit pilot. So we will continue to explore these questions in the survey. And then just going back, as I mentioned in the focus groups, it was a topic that popped up for the first time. And so I think those are good indicators that there's still a lot of opportunity there, but we're headed in a good direction. So we were encouraged by these results. And I've shared them with Jaron and Shana and the Innovative Mobility team as well, so we can use that in our communications. Any questions? Okay, next slide. Okay, continue on. Just use of UTA services, which I've touched on a little bit. Next slide, please. So we do ask a question about if people are aware of services near their home. And again, this supports our marketing efforts as we try to take people from, awareness to trial to consistent use and support. And so this just tells us that people generally are aware that if they do have service near their home, and it does align with the system in general. As Blake was commenting previously on another question, buses do tend to have more coverage. So we see that in the 70% area. Tracks, we have 3 lines. And so the 38 to 35 to 40% area probably reflects people who live close to tracks. Front Runner is in the same territory. And then the streetcar, again, it's a 2-mile line between South Salt Lake and Sugar House. And so, but what this tells us is people at least have awareness of services near their home. And then we can work on our marketing efforts to reach out to them about trying it and using it and the benefits of riding. So it's an important awareness benchmark for us. Next slide, please. I talked about this already. Again, the highlights as we talk about, we do list several things in this question that would this, how likely would this make you more or less likely to ride? The numbers don't add up to 100% because they can list more than one thing. But as we previously mentioned, service is number one. More coverage or routes, more frequency. In the focus groups, this was kind of mentioned as convenience. And so it may not be the most precise thing. Air quality has bumped around over the last few years, but continues to still be behind just having the service accessibility to them. And then even more evening and service routes, although we have added that. It's in there, but is not the top two. So it really is about coverage and frequency. And again, this is one of those things we want to corroborate back with other questions that we've asked. And so we're consistently seeing that service would be the top thing that would make people ride more. Are there any questions about this?
Andrea, could I make a quick comment?
Yes.
One that I would just interject here is that those are what's nice about those are items that UTA has the ability to control. Now there's a lot that goes into that with budget and planning and all that. So I'm not saying that you have the ability to just make it happen quickly, but how gas prices go is not something you can plan on all the time, but you can plan on your strategic plan to put out the amount of coverage and service and frequency. So that should could be viewed as a really positive piece. And I'll relate it to the research when we did the discussions in the focus groups. I mean, it was commented quite a few times. Like, look, I like it. I'm generally appreciative of what UTA does for the community. It's just it doesn't reach my house. I'd use it if it did. And so there's a lot of that demand out there that you're in a good place, as you've seen from so many of these slides, with respect to perception and reputation and all that. It's one of the biggest remaining barriers for what I will assume is several people is that, it's just, is it cheaper and is it quicker for me to do? Because right now it's not, but if it did become that option, very much inclined to go about doing it. So know that exists in what we've seen in the research, and just take that as a positive, that these are things that you can control as you make all your planning.
I do think along the same lines that Blake has mentioned, it probably also aligns with our service choice decision to look at a little more frequency. Doesn't quite hit the coverage ratio as much as the other, but anyway, it also gives you a sense, before the world sort of changed a month ago, but we were very much on the right track, and probably one we would want to come back to.
All right, next slide, please. Next slide, go ahead. So this last section, again, really kind of guides us in some of our advertising and marketing strategy. And so we do ask people questions about awareness of UTA advertisements and then where they see them. So I know there's a lot of information on this slide, but we've held steady over the past several years between kind of the 55 and 60%. People claiming seeing awareness of UTA advertisements or messaging. And so we're maintaining consistency there. And then to the right, you can see kind of where they're seeing it. And TV still holds the top spot. Now, we acknowledge that people probably blend this question a little bit, not specifically with advertisements, but news coverage as well. So there's probably a little bit of blending of results there. But this is, but it also shows that that there's no silver bullet, as I like to say, as technology and digital advertising and how people are receiving their television has changed through streaming services and other tools. This really guides us in more effectively targeting our campaigns and determining depending on what we're marketing and what the message is and what the audience is, where we need to place those messages. And so I think Chad was going to talk a little bit about this from an advertising and marketing perspective as well.
Thanks, Andrea. Just a couple of observations to build on your points. It's not a popular thing to share that TV remains a top medium. No one wants to hear that. The demise of TV has been predicted for years, and yet it continues to be a top performer. We see TV as being the best way to reach the most people with the broadest message. And then a lot of additional elements, as Andrea said, have to play along with that. And the other digital formats and more targeted formats give you an ability to sort of underneath that branding umbrella and broader messaging umbrella, deliver more niche messaging. We don't even call it TV anymore. We're starting to call it video because it's becoming a more and more digital format. We're seeing connected TV, people watching their Rokus and their Apple TVs and their Sling TV or video on demand, and that's still using the same content, but being delivered through different vehicles. There's also delayed viewing if you DVR something or watch video on demand. So video has become much more diverse, and it still remains the strongest performer. We're also really pleased to see the flatness of the line on awareness when you go from year to year. As you know, pressures on budgets increase, clutter in the marketplace increases. And last year, we were encouraged by this survey to see a lot of indication that people were ready to hear it's a new day at UTA. And that's the messaging we started down the path of over the past 12 months and have a plan to continue on for the next several months with your support. And we see that working and resonating in the marketplace. And the final point I'll make, just to come back to where you started, Andrea, is that it is very important that whatever we're messaging ties in closely with what's on the website, with what's on the app, with the technological avenues that writers and non-writers are going to find out about UTA, so that it feels like it's coming from a consistent brand. And the results are showing that people are seeing that more and more, and will want to continue down that path.
Andy, can I ask a question along those lines? With some of the current challenges going on, it's been interesting to see what, and we have done so a little bit, I think, with our most recent ads series that we've been running the last few weeks, but a lot of large agencies have been talking about sort of how they're reacting and supporting folks during this process. And would either the mode or the message change a great deal, or do you just sort of keep going forward and being consistent? What's the thought along that line?
Both have changed slightly. Television consumption, as you can imagine, has gone way up in the past several weeks. Traditional radio listening has gone down, but streaming audio has gone way up. Out of home is not as effective right now as it usually is because fewer people are traveling longer distances. But what we're seeing is that messaging matters and tone matters. Poor Andrea and Nicole have heard this from me many times, and I'll say it one more and then I'll try not to say it again. But I'm a big believer in a book called How Brands Grow, and this idea that brands that keep the engines running, especially during times of crisis, and message with the right tone and sentiment in the right places, are the ones that are more likely to win consumer sentiment and support during and after a crisis. And I think the decisions that you've made over the past several weeks and how you've adjusted both the tone of your messaging and the decision to keep messaging running and to communicate in a very honest, straightforward way, that is right in line with what we're seeing as best practices and what our other clients and partners are doing in their messaging. So kudos to you for foreseeing that need, for acting on it, and for being prepared proactively to continue to communicate and do it in the right tone. So yes, there are adjustments, but UTA has made those adjustments with your support and suggestion. And I think as long as you keep doing that, you're going to come out of this in great shape.
Carlton, if I may, to your point, and just to add on Chad's point, is that and Andrea can get into the details, I'd like her to add on this, but when we look at our overall strategy, we do change a little bit. So if you look at the last one we did change the tone and the message a little bit, and we'll be doing another brand, proposing another campaign as well, and it will reflect our tone, still our brand, and still our message, but it will reflect the time and reflect what the message we're trying to get across, but also recognize that we want to recognize our operators, recognize the governor, and recognize the situation we're in. But you know, it has to fit in the context of Utah. It has to fit in the context of your leadership. And so we take all those things within our strategy and then come out with a message that fits within that brand. And so you'll see it just tweak a little bit, but it will not seem exactly the same as you would see in something in Denver or Wyoming or even somewhere in Seattle, but it should fit within what you would see at UTA and Utah and feel kind of in the same vein as who we are. So Andrea, would you want to add a little bit more to that?
Yeah, just a little bit. I mean, just echoing what you and Chad have said. You know, as we've mentioned, we retooled our approach last year under, you know, the communications framework. We changed the tone and the look and really focused on the people and the stewardship and the service. And so we were in preparation for year 2 of that campaign just a couple of months ago when the COVID situation hit. So we were fortunate to be able to see what was happening with our peers, see what was happening in our local community, and to make some adjustments. And so the fundamentals of the spot that we just launched, Carlton, that you are referring to, there was an adjustment. It still has those pillars of service and stewardship and people, but with the tone and the messaging adjusted to reflect the times. And it was also a strategy of needing to communicate that we are an essential service, that we're still here and our dedicated employees are still out providing those needed trips. And so we've been fortunate to be able to be nimble and to be able to make those adjustments. And it's a dynamic situation, as we know it is for the entire agency. And so we'll continue to monitor that. And then as life hopefully returns to normal at some point, we will return to our track, but we just adjusted for the times, but with the same fundamentals in place. And I agree with Chad that I think it was important to be on at this time and to be a reassuring voice to the community that we are still here to provide those essential trips.
Thank you.
I think we have just a couple slides left. I know it's been a while, so next slide, please. Yeah, these last couple, as I mentioned, is we do kind of want to know where people would go or have gone for sources of information. So this gives a summary of that. And as I said before, it's one of my common things. There's no silver bullet in just about anything you do in communications. And we see that reflected here as people, so they still look at information on our platforms and on our system for information. They're still looking at printed schedules. Over the years, we've had a lot of discussions about whether to continue printing schedules as technology has increased. But we're seeing increased use of the mobile apps. You know, and the website is bumped around a little bit, but I think you'll see on the next slide that the website still is king. So this tells us as an organization between my team and GJ's team with customer experience and others on Nicole's team that we need to continue planning and investing in multiple tools to get people information about how to use our system.
Andrea, it seems to me that in each case, each of these 5 areas, they dropped this year. There was a decline in every one of these 5 sources of information. Is there a reason for that?
I think you might be on mute, Andrea.
Oh, sorry. Am I off mute now?
Right. Yes, you are.
You're good.
I don't know if Blake or Alex would chime in. I don't have a specific answer. Then it could just be a reflection of the actual sample we got this year, and a little bit of a variation from year to year. But there's no other specific indicator for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Alex, feel free to chime in here because it is strange. Sometimes these things spread out through a broader base, year over year, and I'm trying to look. That doesn't necessarily seem to be the case because it is a consistent downward trend, and unless a different indicator or option was added that we just didn't report, then that would, like, if there was another option for this year that wasn't for previous years, but I don't believe that was the case. Any insight here, Alex?
No, we did not ask any follow-on questions to this, so we have only just what we have here. And so we don't have any additional kind of context for this, just that there has been a decline across the different channels. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have any other questions around this.
I had a question about the mobile app. Is that the third-party transit app that we have been working with? Is that what that is reflective of, or is it reflective of some other mobile device of mobile access point?
The question is not specific to the transit app because we just launched our partnership with Transit last July, and before that we had several apps available, and there were 2 or 3 that were very popular. So it's intended to be a broad question. But to Ken's point, other than maybe getting a different sample size this year, it's something that we will explore further, and maybe there is something else we need to add to this question this year, and we can explore that a little bit further just to make sure we're capturing everything.
That would be great. I kept thinking of mobile app, and we think about our standalone apps, but people go to Google Maps or they go to other sources, and they may not be considering those as mobile apps like we might. It would just be interesting to see where they're going to make sure that we're supporting that, because it's hard to force them to go somewhere they don't want to be. So.
Great. All right. Next slide. Okay, I think this might be the last one. So we asked a question about where people would go to seek information about UTA, and as you can see, the website is the #1 reported case. And so as we mentioned last year, we are currently engaging with a consultant and making some additional investments and upgrades to our website, and that will continue through this year. But again, this just shows us that people are going to multiple places for information. While the website is the clear leader, that's also, for the most part, an in-home kind of tool. So people still need other tools as at different places along their journey to get information. And so again, my silver bullet theory is that we still need to have multiple sources of information available for people to get information about our services.
Andrea, and I don't know that you would know this. This probably goes also with the same question. are they going to the website because that's a more solid and holistic way to get an answer, or are they going there because that's their preference?
We don't ask that question. We could delve into a little bit more.
I just think it maybe guide us a little bit as we look at future technologies and platforms and where we would want to. I mean, I think we're always, you're always going to have a website, but would they gravitate to one of these others if they were better?
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see with the Transit app partnership, because they do offer a lot of features, if we see movement in that over the years as well. And I think, next slide, unless there are further questions, that's our summary of this year's benchmark survey.
Well, thank you.
Final questions or comments?
Let me just look to my colleagues, Kent or Beth. Do either of you have any other questions?
Carlton, I didn't have any other questions, but I did have a comment. I wanted to thank you for putting in all of this data and giving us some perspective. I think that it's really critical that we understand what our riders are seeing and doing and thinking about the services that we're providing. And I know that it is, I know it has a lot of value. Like, it can talk to the fact that maybe upgrades to our website have this real critical need. Are more communications on our transit app side? Are there other ways that we can be reaching potential riders and riders as well? That whole nimble piece, I think, is really critical. I just see communications as being something that has even more value. Being able to say what it is that you're doing and offering and what you're thinking, I think, is really critical for our service needs in the future. So thank you for all of that.
Yeah, good report. Thank you. Lots to think about.
Thank you, and thanks to Nicole and then the team from R&R and Cicero. So we look forward to doing the survey again later this year.
Great. Thank you again, and we appreciate it. It's encouraging news, and again, a real testament to the rank and file employees and the great job that they're doing. With that, our next order of business is just our next meeting, which will be on April the 29th at 9:00 a.m. And with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Beth, seconded by Ken. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye. We'll stand adjourned, and thank you, everybody. Thanks to our staff for once again pulling this off, and to all those that participated today. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.